All right, we're going to get started. Hello, and I am Nellie Stansbury, Dennison Consulting's Marketing Manager. I'm thrilled to welcome you to a very special session in our monthly webinar series, which also happens to be our first in 2021. Today's session will be a discussion with and an interview of our special guest, Domino's Chairman of the Board and former CEO, David Brandon, on his experience building dynamic and high-performance business cultures, and his thoughts about what it takes to do this in a digital world. As we give folks another moment or so to filter in, please test out the functionality of the Q&A and chat features below and share where in the world you are joining us from today. Before we move on, I'd like to encourage everyone to utilize those features throughout today's session. I will monitor throughout the discussion to answer any quick questions, but I will also be looking through your questions to pose to our speakers at the end of their discussion when we have dedicated some time for Q&A. Before I turn things over to Dr. Dennison, I'd like to briefly overview the Dennison Consulting firm and what we do, introduce our speakers in more detail, and highlight some of the themes we hope to touch on during today's session. Dennison Consulting is a firm focused on large-scale culture transformation and leadership development, headquartered in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with a European office based outside of Zurich, Switzerland. Our global reach has allowed us to do work in over 50 countries and to develop diverse research and diagnostics. The Dennison mission is to improve organizational performance by developing corporate culture and leadership. Our global team of experts uses our set of diagnostic assessments, which are rooted in research, to provide transformation service for our clients. Next, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Joining us today are David Brandon from Domino's and Dr. Dan Dennison from Dennison Consulting. First, we have David Brandon, Chairman of the Board and former CEO of Domino's. During his 11-year tenure as Domino's CEO, Brandon rebuilt and expanded the leadership team, led the process that resulted in the largest initial public offering in restaurant history, and led the conversion of all domestic stores to one common technology platform named Pulse, which enabled the transition to online and mobile ordering, pizza tracking, and several other in-store technology benefits. Today, Brandon continues as chairman of the board of directors for Domino's, which operates approximately 17,000 stores over 90 markets and boasts system-wide global sales of over $15 billion. In addition to his role as chairman of the board for Domino's, Brandon also sits on the boards of Herman Miller, DTE Energy, PetSmart, and Bay Clubs. He also sits on the board of governors for the American Red Cross, on the board of trustees for the Gerald R. Ford Foundation, and serves as the president of the David A. Brandon Foundation. Next, we have Dr. Dan Dennison, Dennison Consulting's chairman and founding partner. Over the past 25 years, Dan has advanced the field of organizational development and is one of its leading scholars, practitioners, and teachers. Dr. Daniel Dennison's decades-long career as a researcher and professor, first at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business and then at the International Institute for Management Development in Switzerland, has produced some of the most impactful work in the fields of organizational culture and leadership behavior to date. Dan earned his BA from Albion College, his MA from Kent State University, and his PhD in organizational psychology from the University of Michigan. Today, he plays an active role in our firm and driving our research and practice into the future. And with the unfortunate job of following these two gentlemen, I am Nellie Stansbury, Dennison Consulting Marketing Manager. I joined Dennison in June of last year after working in the nonprofit sector and as a marketing consultant for several mission-driven organizations. As a member of Dennison's business development team, I work closely with every department at Dennison to create and promote content that furthers the Dennison brand and supports both our clients and partners. And lastly, before I turn things over to Dr. Dennison, I'd like to overview some of the themes and questions we hope to address during today's session. We hope to cover some of the following questions. How have organizations adapted over the last year? What have they done successfully? And what challenges have they faced? How can organizations create high-performance business cultures in today's digital world? What have organizations done to make progress on their diversity, equity, and inclusion during this time? How can leaders manage the dynamics between remote workers and workers on the front line? How is the retail industry going to change in the next 2 to 3 years? And what positioned Domino's to succeed this past year? Now, without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Dan to get us started. Dan and Dave, would you like to join us?
Sure. Thank you, Nellie. And thanks for getting us started. And thanks, Dave, so much for joining us. It's a real delight to see you and to have a chance to talk and to get the benefit of some of your perspective on what's going on this past year. Just think of it. What were we doing a year ago today? And how innocent we were. And it must have been easy. It didn't seem like it was easy at the time. But, you bring a really unique perspective to this. And one of the first things I'd like to ask you about is how's it been as a chair and as a member of several boards of directors? How has that worked over this period of time? Have you been able to meet? Are you able to get your work done? What's worked well and what's been the most challenging part of it?
Well, honestly, a year ago, if you looked at my plan calendar for the 12 succeeding months, you probably would have had 20 airplane trips, board meetings, committee meetings, business meetings of all types and kinds. And in the past 12 months, I have been to 0 face-to-face meetings. We've had no board meetings, no committee meetings. We've even, I'm involved with the KKR private equity firm. I'm what they call an executive advisor working on deals. We've actually transacted multi-billion-dollar acquisitions and we've never visited the company. We've done it all virtually.
Wow.
So what we've learned how to do over the last 12 months is figure out how to get business done, how to create good governance models, how to communicate internally and externally using Zoom or Teams or pick your favorite.
You're expert in them all now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's quite amazing. No trips, no face-to-face meetings. What part of that has worked well, and what part of that's been the most challenging?
Well, the parts that have worked well is you don't realize how much time you spend traveling, commuting, getting to all these places to have these meetings until they disappear. And virtually everybody in the process has commented on how much more productive they can be in some respects.
Right.
Simply because you're not waiting at airports, you're not, in multi-hour flights, you're, all that's taken out of the equation. You're not driving to airports and offices. You're not spending the night in the hotel room. So it's loosened up a lot of time in one respect. The other thing I believe the companies are finding is they've gone through a budget cycle now, because we've wrapped most of the companies I'm affiliated with are on calendar year, fiscal years. They've wrapped up their budget cycle and they've learned for the first time exactly how much money is being spent.
Oh yeah.
Ferrying people all over the world and traveling, and the whole kind of travel and entertainment expense line got cut by 95%, and it's real money. So those are the benefits. But I will tell you, virtually every board I'm on, and we just had a board meeting over the last couple of days at Domino's actually. All of the directors are bemoaning the fact that it's been so long since we've been in the room together. You miss some of the most important conversations take place during the breaks and at lunchtime and before and after the meetings, the dinners. Those are productive times to create relationships,
right.
Have very productive conversations, and you miss all of that. And that's a big downside. And then if I was running one of these companies, I would, as each month goes on, I would get a little bit more concerned about where my culture is going and whether I'm starting to get disconnected in terms of my communication with my team and with that kind of cultural connection that people get at that place of work.
What are some of the most interesting innovations that you've seen in this time? You know, the many people have said, well, serendipity is gone. You know, the idea that you have a dinner conversation where there's some real insights. Some organizations have even tried to kind of structure informality. But what are some of the things that you've seen that you build in order to keep it going, even with these constraints?
Yeah, I think a lot of the companies have done a really good job of taking some of that flexible time that now exists as a result of the fact that everybody is available and accessible.
Hmm.
I know I always had a fairly flat organization chart, and I have a lot of direct reports, and I love to get them all in the room at one time.
Right.
Important thing, but it was exceedingly difficult because one guy's in France and one gal's traveling to the West Coast and somebody else,
Right.
and it was almost impossible to get everybody scheduled at one time
Right.
unless you kind of made it a mandate. And then if you had a town meeting or some kind of a all hands session, if you got 80% of the people to attend, it was probably a big success because again, everybody's moving, traveling, scheduled.
Hmm.
In this world, we're all available. As long as we have our computers open, we're
Yeah.
available. And so in a convoluted way, in some respects, uh, CEOs and leaders have been able to stay connected more
Hmm.
immediately and more directly with more people just by virtue of the technology and the fact that everybody's kind of available from a scheduling standpoint.
Some organizations, client organizations that we've worked with, actually claim that they're better connected with their people now than they were before because they need to be explicit about it, deliberate, proactive about it. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but several people believe that strongly.
Yes, a lot of it depends on the business model. If you've got a lot of people who are traveling and you're very decentralized as an
Hmm.
organization, and under the old model, you're running around trying to touch and feel all the different facilities and locations. I know at Domino's, our CEO there now has these town halls, and he'll have 2,000 people
Right.
that he can communicate with real time via the virtual mode. And
Hmm.
you would have never been able to pull that off in the former world because we'd always be thinking about how many people can we fit in a room, and we can't get the international people, we can't get the field operations people.
Right. Right.
Now you can get them all together. So some of that is going to stick for sure because we've learned how to do this and we've learned how it works. I don't think it's a replacement for
Hmm.
the importance of connectivity and onboarding new team members and creating a cultural affinity for who you are and how your business works and what it feels like to work at a
Hmm.
company.
Hmm.
Uh, Hopefully that doesn't, pendulum doesn't swing so far that we lose all that. I think that would be a tragedy.
But Domino's hired a lot of people this past year to meet the demand. They onboarded a lot of people. What are some of the lessons from do? Obviously, it's possible because you guys did a great job of that.
Well, to be perfectly honest, a lot of the people that we've hired were in the marketplace. And
Hmm.
so our stores were open. We were considered
Okay.
a business. So when you see us bring tens of thousands of people, we're onboarding those people at the store level, at
Hmm.
the operations level, at the supply chains, our distribution centers, which is kind of the fundamental core of our supply chain. We've hired a lot of people, but those facilities and those activities have been ongoing pretty much as they normally would. At the corporate level, I don't know the statistic, but I would guess that our hiring is down substantially
Right.
simply because it's difficult. It's exceedingly difficult to make a really important hiring decision when you're never in the same room with the individual.
Right.
It's being done, but
Yes.
I don't think it's perfect. And onboarding them and giving them a real good, first day experience. One of the things I put in place at Domino's, I felt so really strongly about is that the first day of work, we put you in a Domino's uniform. We put you in our store. We build a store within our
Hmm.
office headquarters. We put you in that store in a uniform. We taught you how to make a pizza. We explained to you how the technology in the store worked. We explained to you all the different positions in the store. We put you in the environment that makes our business happen.
Right.
And we had you feel that. And then you took a couple of the pizzas that you made home and fed them to your family or to your loved ones or your partner. And you talked about your experience that day of learning how to make a pizza, learning how Domino's
Yeah.
pizza works, learning what happens in a store. And that's the first way to try to create that emotional connection to the brand and the company.
Mhm.
And it sounds simple, but I have to tell you, most relationships that are successful get off to a good start.
Right.
And to my way of thinking, that's a great way to get a relationship off to a good start. Virtually impossible to do that, over a computer screen and create that sense of belonging, that sense of onboarding. So I do think we're sacrificing a lot of those kinds of things in the world that we're in. And I look forward to the day when
Right.
we can resume some of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Nellie Stansbury that kicked things off today, no one has ever met in our organization. Actually, no, someone ran into her on the street and said, "What? Aren't you Nellie?" But you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And the first day, the first week, I guess we sort of, ran her ragged because we had sort of all of the time booked with meeting everybody, talking to everybody, making it as close to a real experience as you could. And you've got to start right off the bat. But that also, you've got two very different parts of the organization for Rich Allison and the team to lead. There's a headquarters group that works pretty well on a remote basis, on a virtual basis. Maybe they get a little tired of looking at their computer screen, but it works. But 90% of the employees of the organization are in the distribution centers, are in the stores, are on the front line where things haven't changed as much. How have you managed that and those differences in expectations? And how do you think that evolves? This is a big disconnect in some ways.
It is, and it's tricky because it's easy to shut an office down and say, it's safer if everybody goes home. It's safer if you work from home. It's safer if you don't travel.
Mm-hmm.
Many of you have got child care issues because schools are closed, and we're going to help you solve that by virtue of the fact that we let you work, from home. Those are all wonderful things, and most companies are making those decisions to send people home and leave them home for all those purposes. The flip side of it is in the retail industry, while we're doing that for kind of the big shots in the headquarters, the people that are out there making pizzas and delivering pizzas and getting dough and ingredients and supplies to the stores so that the stores can operate. I mean, those people, they're out there mingling with the public. They're more
Right.
they're more at risk as it relates to the virus. Their child care issues are the same as everybody else's, but they got to work. And so
Right.
retail organizations really have to walk the balance of making sure that, we lead by example and we kind of practice what we preach when we're telling people, you got to be out there. We're an essential organization that provides a real benefit during this critical time. I think you have to really balance that with making sure that your leaders are sharing to a certain degree in the risk and sharing in the responsibility that you have to be out there where the business is happening. So
Right.
I think our team does a really good job of staying connected with our franchisees and our stores and making sure our operations people are out there. Because in many cases, the stress that people are under, what they really need is they need to feel appreciated. They need to feel recognized. They want to make sure that people understand the sacrifice they're making, and that's hard to do over Zoom.
Well, and there's a great history in Domino's that makes me, think of pictures of like you making a pizza. This guy actually knows how to make a real pizza, and it's a good one. Patrick Doyle, showing up at the stores just to be there, just to appreciate, just to listen, just to learn. Rich being on the road, on the front line. Wow, you can't do that this past year. That's a big loss.
Yeah, I made it a point in my first week to go through what we affectionately call Domino's Pizza Prep School, and it's a multi-day school that really teaches you how everything works. So I got fitted for my uniform and I went through that whole process. And thank God I did, because it wasn't too long after I was in Mexico City and we had a big ceremony to clip the ribbon on the opening of I think it was our 400th store in Mexico. And so TV cameras were there and live feeds to the local television stations in Mexico City. And the guy that was kind of producing this looks at me and he goes, "I think it would be good if we filmed you making a pizza." And so now I have like however many million people on live television. Thank God I knew how to make a pizza, because I would have looked really, really foolish. So we worked hard. I forced all the members of the leadership team to go through pizza prep school. They all got certificates and symbols of graduation. I think it's exceedingly important that television program where, you know, the CEO goes undercover.
Yes, right.
Always drove me crazy. It was like, you know, some CEO that runs a cruise line actually goes on a cruise and they think this is worthy television.
Yeah.
To me,
Did that all the time.
yeah, if you're leading these organizations, if you're not out there where the business is happening and everything you know is what's filtered and given to you in a boardroom somewhere, you're probably not going to be a very good leader.
It's funny. It reminds me of one of the first projects that we did together with Domino's, where the investor relations group looked at the results that showed that they were a little disconnected from the core business. And I always loved it because it's one of the most interesting examples of action planning that I've ever seen, which is an investor relations group decides we got to learn how to make a pizza. And you got to do it in 1 minute so that it's it's a good pizza that you can sell. And it wasn't quite as easy as they thought it was going to be, but it did connect them to the operation.
Yes, making a pizza when you're hand stretching the dough as we do. So we use fresh dough and we hand stretch it to the right size and the right thickness. It's one of those things that looks easy or it says easy and it does hard.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people looking, oh, I can do that. And
anybody can do that.
They end up with a square tip.
But you're one of the most successful executives that we've ever worked with in terms of your ability to transform a culture and to build it and to have that be a key part, if not the core, of the business strategy. I think it's worth taking a step back and saying, what were the key elements to doing that before the pandemic? And then to think through, how can we best realize that same dynamic, that same energy, that same magic in a digital world? How do we plan for how we're going to do that better and learn even when we get a little closer back to normal? But what's the core? How do you build a high performance business culture?
Well, one of the things I learned really quickly as I began my career is the companies with the best people will win. So it's all about getting the most talented, high energy, highly motivated, goal-oriented people. You surround yourself with that, and it's way more important than the business model, the industry, or anything else. So I had a great experience relatively early in my leadership career, going all the way back to my days at Velasas, when actually in those days, there were a couple of guys that traveled around the country for a period of a couple of years, and they visited companies, and they had a methodology where they would do surveys with employees, and they wrote a book called The 100 Best Companies to Work For in America. Mm-hmm. They heard about some of the things we were doing that were innovative at Velasas. And so they came and visited, and lo and behold, we were named one of the 100 best companies to work for in America. And in fact, for 8 consecutive years, we earned that designation. Now, that 100 best thing has now been kind of taken over by Fortune magazine. They've created the 100 best consulting firm, and it's become a bit commercialized. But back in those days, when we put that banner up on the building and said, you know what, of all the companies in America, we're one of the 100 best companies to work for, you would be amazed how easy it was to recruit talent and retain talent, because everybody wants to work for a company. And it taught me the power of your employment brand as a company. We always think of brand in terms of consumers and customers, but you also have an employment brand. What does your brand stand for with the talent that you're trying to recruit and retain at your company? And our brand suddenly became powerful. I mean, we had people lined up for jobs. We were able to pick, the best of the best. And I was able to surround myself with these terrific folks who were aligned with the goals, the mission, the vision of the company. And my job just became infinitely easier because they didn't need me looking over their shoulder. I could proudly watch them execute the strategies and plans that we put together as a team. So I saw that power, and I still today believe that the CEOs, the leaders in business that are the most successful, think about their employment brand. They manage that brand. It's all related to the culture that they create. And if in fact it puts them in an advantageous position where the most talented people want to come work for you versus somebody else, everything else gets easier. So one of the reasons we hooked up with Dennison Consulting is I'm a big believer in what gets measured gets done. It was good to get kind of this third-party recognition, but I wanted a deeper dive into really what was working in the culture, what could be improved. And that's when we implemented the culture survey and began to learn, we're doing great in a lot of different areas, but we can improve in this way. We can put some objectives around, another area of opportunity and measure that culture on a regular basis so that we could nurture it, improve it, and continue to stay focused on it.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, one of the other things that's been powerful this year, still a long way to go, but is our efforts in creating work environments that are diverse or equitable and are inclusive. And are there examples where you think even during a very stressful time that organizations have been able to make progress on this, this noble objective too, because it's, a simple extension of what you just said on the power of the employee brand, because you want to make that a powerful magnet for everybody.
It's fascinating. Every company I'm affiliated with, for profit and not for profit, during this time frame have launched initiatives, important initiatives, I would say organizational, structural changes, the creation of programs, processes that are completely around this whole ESG fixation that companies have right now. I just think that, the social context in which we operate has put companies in a position where they've embraced this. They believe in its importance, and they think the time is now. And interestingly enough, to my point earlier, where I think there's been some extra time carved out where it's easier to get people together and focused on a particular initiative. Everybody's not running around and traveling and spend a lot of time doing other things. It's actually been a good time for a lot of the planning and a lot of the kind of formation of activities and strategies around, inclusion and diversity, and really taking a hard look at cultures and saying, how can we be more open? How can we be more embracing of, folks of all types and kinds that come from all kinds of perspectives? So I think there's been actually a huge advancement over the last 12 months, as opposed to, gee, that's all been set aside because we're all in crisis management mode.
Right.
I actually think that it's been a little bit of a blessing because people have really been able to focus on it and make it important.
One of our audience said, what does the acronym ESG stand for? So can you clarify that?
Environmental, social, and governance.
Oh,
And
right.
so, there's a component of it that's all about carbon footprint, and are you being a responsible citizen in terms of how your business model operates within the context of the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Big issue. And then social has to do with diversity, inclusion. It has to do with, are you connected with your communities? Are you a generous company that partners and shares your success with others? And then governance really is this notion of, are the directors of your company, do you have the kind of programs and processes in place that ensures that the company is responsibly engaging in all these areas that once upon a time were seen somewhat superfluous to the business activity, which now I think are becoming far more integrated into, here's what our business is about. Yes, we serve customers. Yes, we have shareholders and we need to produce returns. Yes, we want to make sure we do great things for our employees, but it's becoming equally important that we do great things for our community and for society in general.
It's a tall order, but it's an important one.
A new responsibility, it's a new area of focus, and CEOs, boards, companies are going to be held accountable. There's no question about the fact that the investment community, some of them are actually taking positions that if you don't have the right positioning as it relates to ESG, we're not going to invest in you. So that the pressure is coming from a lot of different perspectives that companies really need to be serious about this.
Yeah, and businesses can be a powerful choice, a powerful source of social change. There's really almost no other activity that's as broad and has the reach to really drive that level of change. And you still have to keep the business going while you're doing that, or you're not positioned to be able to contribute to the society.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In the course of our business, we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees. We operate in all 50 states. But when you're thinking about our business and what's right for our brand and our company, it's not about red states and blue states. It's not about conservatives and liberals. It's not about a lot of these issues that divide our
Right.
nation. It's really about how do we do the right thing to make us proud to come to work every day and be associated with this brand and this company. That's
Right.
how we make decisions, and it's a much better model.
Yeah, that's great. You've spent a lot of your career, most of your career, really in the retail industry, and crazy times because some companies like Domino's, like Amazon, have done spectacularly well in this situation. Others they're they're gone. Um, and you've been in a bunch of different parts of the retail industry too. Um, where's this going? Can you get out your crystal ball? I know it's there in that cabinet behind next to the painting there. Get out that crystal ball. Where's the retail industry going to go in the next just 2-3 years from now? What's it going to look like? What are your thoughts?
The brands and companies in retail that have either been, the ones that have survived, or in many cases, the ones that have prospered during this period, went into the pandemic with some really, really strong engines that were built that enabled them to communicate with their customers and service their customers without necessarily asking them to be in a bricks and mortar location.
Right.
So those companies like Amazon, like Domino's, there are many others who had that ability to immediately stand up business model that said, order online, we'll deliver. Order online, you can pick it up in the parking lot. Order online.
Right.
The fact that we were able to operate in this environment and service customers in a safe way put us in a very advantageous position. And there's some companies out there that have done it really, really well because they had the infrastructure built. The
Mm-hmm.
companies who were behind the curve, they didn't have a well-functioning web store built. They really didn't have that digital connection with customers that allowed them to market and communicate with their customers in an effective way. That they didn't have delivery systems and carry out and take out systems, pickup systems, whatever the case may be. If they didn't have those things built and you try to build them during a pandemic, it's next to impossible. So some of them have, kind of figured out a way to survive through this period, in many cases through subsidization from the government, as well as just laying off everybody and, batten down the hatches. Those companies, if they don't have the ability or find the resources that enable them to get in this game and get in this game quickly, they're going to be in trouble moving ahead, because the consumer is now, I think, at all levels. It used to be the baby boomers just loved to go to the store. Some of them didn't like fiddling around with computers. They didn't trust giving their credit card to a screen and hoping that it was protected. I mean, there were a lot of people who had a bias against this online ordering process. Well, over the past 12 months,
Gotten over that.
We've gotten over that. I mean,
Right.
people in their 80s are sitting down with their laptops and they're ordering things, and they didn't do it before, but they had to learn it, right? And so now people have seen how convenient it is, how efficient it is, how successful it can work, how secure it is. And I think there's a lot of us that long for the day that we can go back and kind of browse through stores and try things on and touch it and feel it, because there's a part of the shopping experience related to that that's very enjoyable. But I can also tell you there are a lot of people who have discovered, man, it's a lot easier having your groceries delivered to your back door. It's a lot easier to have your pet food delivered to the front door. And so the game has changed.
Right.
And again, the brands and companies who are positioned to be a part of that change, they'll do fine. In fact, they'll do better. But there's going to be unfortunately, a lot of dead bodies along the roadside as it relates to concepts and brands that just aren't there.
Right. I always thought that one of the most ambitious parts of your career was actually one of the less successful parts, where you spent several years as the CEO at Toys R Us. And I think that's a fantastic lesson, painful, but a fantastic lesson in how much of a core competency digitalization is and how much time it takes to catch up. What are some of the main lessons that you learned, I guess in some ways the hard way, from that? Because it was a big effort with highest hopes, but in the end didn't go where you hoped it would.
Yeah, through my relationship with some private equity firms, and I was at a point and place in my career where I looked at this great brand, Toys R Us, Babies R Us, brands that have been around for decades, brands that people fondly remembered as kids and then as parents, and in as many cases as grandparents. And the business was just badly broken. And I'm kind of one of those maniacs who loves to take a situation like that and say, okay, how do we fix this? So I spent about 3 years as chairman and CEO of Toys R Us. And the good news is we saved the business in most of the markets in Europe. It's very successful in Asia, Japan, Canada. I mean, we saved that brand and that company in a lot of places, but through a variety of circumstances that are too complicated to go in right now, we ended up literally shutting down the brand in the US. We were pretty much forced to do that, which I will forever, feel badly about, because I don't think that was the right decision. I don't think it was the right course of action. But when I look back and I say, okay, what were the things that caused this 75-year-old brand to suffer to the point that it did and get downscaled to the point that it did? First and foremost, it's cultural. I mean, the company, as opposed to a sign on the wall that said one of the 100 best companies to work for in America, the company had gone years in a row with negative same-store sales. I think we had 7 years in a row of negative same-store sales when I got there. So it almost becomes a culture of losing. And how could you not help but feel that way? The company just kept getting smaller, sales get smaller, more cuts, more downsizing.
A
And
cycle.
every year, yeah, it's kind of like, okay, how bad is it going to be this year, as opposed to how do we go win,
Right.
and how do we taste victory and then build upon that victory. When you've got a company that's in 30 countries around the world and you've got tens of thousands of employees and stores scattered all over the place, how do you instill, that concept of winning when,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, every year for years, many of them just, it's kind of like every year you get hit in the head with a hammer. After a while, you just expect it and plan for it.
Right.
So we had a cultural challenge of, how do we get confidence back, and how do we get momentum back, and how do we get positivity? That was kind of the internal issue that we were wrestling with, that we never were able to really get over the hump.
Mm-hmm.
And a
And
lot
that,
of that was driven by the fact that we had a very, very clumsy and non-competitive digital experience
right.
we were investing money in it, a lot of money, trying to fix it because we knew it. But the Amazons of the world, the Walmart through their acquisition of Jet.com, there were companies out there. Target had put billions of dollars of investment into their digital experience for customers. We didn't have billions of dollars. We had
Right.
tens of millions, but we didn't have billions. So we could never get ahead of them. We could never even get caught up with them, because every year we took a step forward, they had the resources and the momentum to take 3 steps forward.
Right.
So as hard as we tried, we could never get that web store to be preeminent or even competitive. And that's the way the business was shifting in every respect, particularly in those 2 categories. So we were a victim of our inability to have the vision to
Mm-hmm.
understand how important that digital connection and that digital platform
Right.
is going to be by the time we get to the years, 2015, 16, 17. We didn't get it right. And ultimately in the US, it was the primary reason why we just couldn't compete.
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's really interesting. And the great part is that, you gave it all you had, and you landed on your feet on the other end and learned a lot in doing it. And some days that's the best we can do.
Well, it's really interesting. You go into a business that's very broken. It's got, we had $5 billion of debt. We were very constrained in terms of our availability of cash because the company had been loaded up with very high interest debt that
Right.
we could never get out from under. I mean, there were just a lot of problems there, and you go in there and you try like crazy to fix it, and it becomes an emotional issue, right? I'm used to winning.
Right.
I wanted to put that one in the victory column. And for me, it was personally really, really devastating that we could not figure out a way to keep that brand alive in the US, because
Right.
I'm a grandparent now. Everybody I met during the 3 years I was in that job, everybody I met had a story connected with, particularly Toys R Us. They had some story about when they were a kid or when they were a parent or what they remembered. I mean, the affinity of that brand and the emotional connection to that brand is something that we could have and should have been able to build upon. And that brand in the US should still exist today. Maybe it'll come back around. I keep hoping that'll be the case. But, again, you get behind, and it's the amount of investment and risk associated with trying to get to the point where you can compete against some of these giants like
Oh,
Amazon
yeah.
and Walmart. It's a tough call for anybody that wants to go out and try to finance that kind of an effort.
Great insight, too, in the balance between the technology and the culture side of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We've got some questions here from our audience today. So we got about 15 minutes left. So let's switch over, put Nellie back in charge here, get us keep us on track. What are some of the questions that have come in from the audience that we can pose to Dave and get some of his thoughts on those?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of really good ones.
Good.
We probably won't have a chance to get to all of them, but one that stood out that I wanted to get started with from Sean was, given, Dave, your participation on multiple boards, is there anything unique that you found about developing a high performance culture from the board membership that is different or needs more focus in comparison to the development of a high performance culture within the company?
Yeah, I think I've served on 14 corporate boards over the course of my career. I started doing it
Wow.
rather early. I always thought it was a great learning experience for me to see how other companies did things, and hopefully I added some value along the way. So I've had a lot of different perspective on well-functioning boards, and governance makes a huge difference. And going back to the Toys R Us situation, I can tell you that one of the problems with Toys R Us is that there were actually three equal partners, three different organizations that owned a third of
Mm-hmm.
that business. And it created an environment in the boardroom where oftentimes those three different disparate investors had very differing perspectives on strategy and decision making.
Right.
So the management team, and some of this predated me, thankfully I was able to kind of, wrangle some of this in, but for years, there was a dynamic in the boardroom where management would show up and listen to the arguments and the debates that would take place among members of the governing body. Well, that creates a tremendous amount of confusion, and who do I listen to, and whose deck is smarter than the other guy or gal's deck. And so I've seen how boards can become dysfunctional, and that translates through the organization. There's a lack of clarity and cohesiveness in terms of how the businesses ultimately go to market and how the culture evolves. The flip side of that is the Domino's board. I'm a believer that sometimes you let boards get too large, and that can be a problem because people are fighting for airtime and competing for airtime, and it becomes a little bureaucratic. The best boards I've sat on tend to be smaller. 8, 9, 10 people to me is plenty in terms of making sure that everybody's engaged and actively involved. The Domino's board, it's very collegial. There's no sharp elbows. There's no mixed signals in front of management where they're sitting there listening to members of the board argue about should we go north or should we go south. That tone that's set at the very top, and really the very top is governance. That tone that's set there translates through the organization. And so getting the board that's got independence, that brings the right expertise, but also brings the right attitude, and their cultural fit with the company is just as important as any employee. If they're not embracing the culture and a good fit within the context of how that culture is being managed and executed, and it's gonna create conflict and problems. So it's a great question. It should be a very important focus. We're getting to the point in governance where there's way more controls. There was a period of time where the CEO kind of hired all their friends, and that became the board, and it became a very Me Too kind of situation. And whatever you say, friend, CEO, we're going to go along with because we just appreciate the fact that you invited us on this board. It's a very different model now.
Mm-hmm.
There's a much higher level of scrutiny just to be a board member. There's a higher level of accountability, higher level of transparency, more accountability. Your fiduciary responsibilities are way more apparent and way more focused in terms of decision making. So it's one of the reasons I enjoy it. It's important, and it definitely makes a difference.
Great.
I have sort of a follow-up question. This is from someone else, but I think it ties nicely in. During your tenure as CEO at Domino's, how did Domino's attract employees that fit into the modeled organizational culture and nurture that culture?
Yeah, we had in place, and I think we still do today, pretty exhaustive processes for how we selected people to join the organization. It sounds a little arrogant, but I think it's the right way to set the aspiration. I always made the point of view that if you wanted to come to work at Domino's or Velasas or any place I've ever led, it's a privilege to work there. And you have to prove to me that you deserve the privilege of working at this organization. And it sets a high bar. Our ratios of the number of resumes we review, the number of initial interviews, the number of follow-up interviews. Sometimes my HR partners and I drove the organization crazy because we believed that a bad hire was way worse than no hire at all. And so if it took us longer, and we're an operating business, so somebody's saying, I need bodies, I need to get this job done, and we would say, well, we know that and we respect that, but we're not going to throw a warm body in there because we know where that ends. We're going to take our time and we're going to highly selectively identify the talent and the cultural fit that's required for this to be a long-term relationship. And you just be patient and figure it out, and we're going to make the right decision. And so that notion of it's a privilege to work here, we're going to take our time, we're going to get the right person, we're not going to let the operators push us into a decision that we know isn't going to be a good one long term. Those are aspects of how I approached it. And the first thing I did in every job I've ever had as CEO, and I guess I've had 4 organizations that I've fundamentally led as CEO. The first thing I did is I moved the HR leader, their office next door to mine. What's interesting is usually they were, somewhere in the bowels of the building, and, CEOs like to surround themselves with their CFO and, whatever. My attitude is I wanted to literally send a message to the organization that the person I wanted to see the most, I wanted to see every day, that I wanted to have the closest connection with, is the individual that I put the responsibility of helping me serve as the quality control over culture and the quality control over the talent that we let into the organization. I wanted to be as connected to that as I could be, not only, from kind of a optical perspective in terms of moving the office next door, but actually from a substantive connection, because I wanted to be integrated and involved in how those processes were being executed.
That's great. Nellie, we got time for 1 or 2 more questions here.
I have this one is not on the same train, but I think it's a good one. What advice would you offer to an organization that is succeeding in digital change, but whose supply chain partners are behind them in the curve?
Yeah, good luck. The choice of who your partners are, I think what we've learned over the last year, the choice of who your partners are, how financially solid they are, how operationally, the expertise that they bring operationally to your equation, those things are really important. And I think the last year, if you always went to whoever was the lowest price, if you always, if you put too many of your eggs in one basket, if you didn't think about diversifying your vendor base, if you didn't have contingency plans in place, if you hadn't developed enough relationships, the last year taught you that, if you've kind of built a house of cards there, that in perfect times, everything works fine. But when you have something like this thrown at you, if that house of cards falls, it's really hard to immediately put it back together. And sadly, there have been a lot of organizations that I think took kind of the cheap way with their vendor relationships. They were, a mile wide and an inch deep, and probably weren't thinking through, okay, what happens if? And it's not like everybody should have predicted a worldwide pandemic, but there are a variety of other things that can happen, natural disasters, I think everybody's learning coming out of this pandemic is, as it relates to our supply chain, we really need to be thoughtful in making sure that we have a primary and a secondary capability that's going to afford us some flexibility if we run into a difficult time. Because it could be labor issues, it could be strikes. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things that can happen out there besides a pandemic, and you've got to be prepared to be able to continue to execute your business. And if right now you're at a point where you're waiting for parts, you're waiting for equipment, supplies that you need to provide your customer with the promise, in this environment, it's really hard to run around and tap somebody on the shoulder and say, I know you have some extra capacity, we're looking for it.
Yeah.
That would be luck more than the practical solution in today's world. So the lesson to be learned here is rethink those relationships and those contracts and those business connections that you have that are integral to your ability to execute your business plan.
That's great. One more question.
Yeah.
I think we got time. Go ahead,
I
Nellie.
think so. This is from Franz. Franz, people are, getting tired of the pandemic and getting tired of looking at their computer. What are your top 3 to-dos to stay connected with and respected by a company?
Yeah, listen, I don't know if this is I feel I'm specifically addressing this particular question in terms of 3 things, but I actually believe that people crave the relationships, social and otherwise, that they have at the workplace. I think we're all sick of staring into a computer. We're all sick of being in our homes every day. We want to be out there. We want to reconnect with relationships that we have that are important, not just from a business perspective, but from a personal and social perspective. I think people want to be let out of jail. I want everybody to get vaccinated. I want everybody to feel comfortable going back to work, maybe not 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. I think there'll be some modifications in terms of some of the learnings that we've taken from this, but I want to get people back together. To me, the goal and aspiration is for you to want to come to work. We named the lobby of our facility at Domino's the Welcome Center, and we want people to walk through our employees every day, prospective employees who are there for an interview, our franchisees, our vendors. We want them to walk in there, and the minute they arrive, we want them to feel welcome. We're going to feed them. We're going to give them free drinks. We're going to coddle them. We're going to say, aren't you glad to be here? And I aspire for every organization I've been a part of that, people recognize that we spend a disproportionate amount of our waking hours at work. Most of us, when you consider our waking hours over the course of a work week, a disproportionate amount of our time is getting to and from work, at work, thinking about work, working at home. And if you can't make that an enjoyable part of your life, it's pretty hard to have a happy life. And so we have a responsibility as an organization to make it a place that you want to be at, relationships that you want to continue to nurture and have them endure, loyalty to that company and that brand that goes beyond just a job and a paycheck. If in fact we can accomplish that, we're not going to have people say, gee, can I stay at home in my sweats and just be on Zoom all day long for the rest of my life? We'll be in a situation where there'll be people say, you know what, I'm dying to get back and walk through that Welcome Center and smell the pizza being made in the test kitchen and reconnect with my friends as well as my colleagues. The companies that I think are really strong with really great cultures, they're not going to have to beg their people to come back to work. They're going to be ready to come back to work, at least a good portion of the time.
That's great. Dave, on behalf of our audience, I want to thank you for your candor, as always, your insights, sharing your experience with us, and having a good bit of fun in doing so. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure there'll be lots of follow-up questions that we'll send to you, and we'll try to get back to our audience as best we can. But we're just delighted to have you with us today, and really enjoyed it a lot.
Well, I'm happy to do that, Dan. You and I don't count the years anymore.
No, that's no.
But it's been enjoyable. I have great respect for you and your organization and what you bring to the party as it relates to business outcomes and successful companies and culture. So I'm proud to be associated with you. Thanks. I hope this has been beneficial, and I wish everybody well, stay healthy, and stay safe.
Fantastic.
And before we part ways, I would like to announce and invite you all to a very exciting event, the Denison Global Forum on May 18th through the 20th. This is our first announcement of the event, so you are all hearing about this virtual and interactive forum before anyone else. Let me share my screen with you guys. Please scan the QR code or visit the registration link to register now. But don't worry, as Dan mentioned, we will also provide these links to you as part of our follow-up Our forum will feature many industry speakers, including Dave Brandon, speaking on a variety of topics, including some similar topics to those we've explored today. More information on the speakers and the presentations will be coming soon, so please register to stay up to date on that. And thank you so much for joining us all. We will talk to you all very soon.
All right. Thanks. Stay safe. Talk to you soon, Dave.